George Kittle is expecting the biggest tight end contract in NFL history. Now, I think the tight end position is a very important position. He can block. You could put him at the wide receiver position because he's very fast, and he could do a lot of things inside and out that other tight ends can't do.
Yeah, he's lined up in the backfield in some formations this year, too.
But the fact that you're talking about possibly an $80 or possibly $85 million contract for a tight end is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous.
Can you see it, though, with the way the Niners are built, really not having the big receiver contracts, not having the big running back contracts to make that kind of thing work, though? Because, again, they rotate those guys anyway with the running backs and the receivers.
It bothers me because I like George Kittle. I think he's a great player. I think he's a tremendous talent for the San Francisco 49ers. And moving forward, if they have any chance of winning a championship in the near future, George Kittle is going to have a lot to do with it. The problem is they're a running team. They've been a running team for the last 6-7 years. Even with Jim Harbaugh there, they were a running team. And as much as I love George Kittle and how good he is, and he's been on my fantasy team, I actually drafted George Kittle last year when everybody didn't even know who George Kittle was. Last year. I mean, George Kittle was expected to be a good tight end, but not the tight end that he turned out to be last year. I picked him in the 4th round, and people thought I was nuts. And he was one of the reasons why the year before I won one of my leagues.
Same. I think I drafted him, the league I won, I think I drafted him in the 14th round that year.
Yeah.
As a sleeper. That's really what we were going for with Kittle.
And Kittle became one of the best tight ends in football after last year's season. But knowing that you only had 2 great seasons, you cannot demand or ask for more than $70 million. And what I'm reading through different stories, articles, is George Kittle is going to want to make between $75 to $90 million a year. Yes, he's in the prime of his career. He's 20. I think he's 26 years old.
Yeah.
He's 26 years old.
He's entering his 4th season.
Yes. To me, to give a tight end that kind of money, you'd have to be crazy.
But again, I think with the Niners situation, I think they're one of the teams that can afford to do that, though.
How do you figure? You just paid Jimmy Garoppolo almost $140 million 2 years ago. Then you decided to trade away one of your best defensive pieces for a 1st-round draft pick that I believe is just going to be a complete bust. I think he's going to be a complete bust. I don't understand that whole move. I do believe Joey Bosa is a beast, and I think he's not Joey. Nick Bosa is a beast, and he's proven that he can change defense just with a blink of an eye. But to pay a tight end, I even think paying a wide receiver between $100 and $105 million is outrageous.
But again, it depends on the structure of the team. What did the 49ers do well was rotating receivers and rotating running backs, and oftentimes using receivers as running backs. So because they don't have to commit to one guy to do that, they can afford to pay Kittle in comparison to having other teams where you have to pay this wide receiver to keep the offense going. You have to pay this running back to keep the offense going. The Niners are not in that type of situation, at least right now. Maybe it changes. Maybe the offense will evolve in 2 or 3 years, but right now I think they can afford to do that.
Snug the Cat says, to Speedy's point, why wouldn't you allocate the cap to a rare top 3 tight end that can catch and block? Just spend less and easier to find running backs and wide receiver position. Here's the problem. Did they win with the great tight end? They didn't. You need wide receivers, especially in the playoffs. You need guys that can make plays in the open field, something they did not have in the Super Bowl, and one of the reasons why they lost. And here's another thing that they had a problem with in the Super Bowl. They couldn't stop the quarterback with the last 7 minutes of the game. This is a defense that was highly profiled, one of the best defenses in football, and to give a guy like George Kittle that kind of money when Nick Bosa will be a free agent in 3 years, that's outrageous. I'm saving that money. I'm paying the best player on the team, and that's, to me, it's Nick Bosa.
But I think you could pay both anyway. Right?
How are you going to pay both?
Most of the team is young right now.
You just gave Jimmy Garoppolo that kind of money. Now you're going to give George Kittle that kind of money. Where are you going to have? And you say they're fairly young. You're saying that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So You're going to tell me right now that defensive line. Now, I'm not sure who's on the defensive line right now. If I pull it up, I would say about 2 of their front 7 are going to be free agents in the next year and a half.
Okay, so you could let Solomon Thomas walk. They just paid.
Not
Aaron
talking about
Armstead.
Solomon Thomas. Solomon Thomas is not even on the starting lineup. He's not even starting for the team. He didn't even start.
He
in the
would be
playoffs.
now if because Buckner's not there. But
how do you figure they brought in a rookie?
They brought in Kinlaw.
Yeah, who they think is going to be the starter on that team.
Right. Now, the other thing, too, is they already paid Eric Armstead, so they don't have to worry about that anymore. D. Ford is somebody that they can rotate around.
You overpaid D. Ford.
They did that already, so...
How are you going to afford George Kittle? You're going to pay George Kittle $80 million. You just paid D. Ford almost $80 million. You gave Jimmy Garoppolo $100 million. And now you're going to pay an offensive player, to me, as great as he is, that kind of money when you didn't win with him. You just didn't win with him. So now I'm not saying that you can't win with him, but you need wide receiving play. And that's something that they need to look for in the draft, which they really fell short. I really thought they fell short in this year's draft.
The pick that they took Kinlaw pick, we thought they were going to take a wide receiver. They didn't.
You would think that they were.
But again, that's really, I think, the only 2 weaknesses of their team is their receiver and their second corner spot. But that's
and 2 of the most important positions on the team.
So, I don't mind it because you shouldn't let another bad contract like maybe what D. Ford is right now hinder that, because otherwise you're sacrificing a big part of your offense. So who becomes besides Garoppolo, who becomes the next best player on that offense? Is it Tevin Coleman, who can't stay healthy? Is it Raheem Mostert, who was great at times but was an inconsistent running back still throughout the year? That's what it comes down to. And a lot of the times it's also Kittle getting all that attention, helping out those guys pay off. And then in the playoffs, you saw him used as a decoy because then everyone thought Kittle was going to get a lot, and then they were able to run so well.
And I know Snug says that Kittle's a 2-in-1 type of player. He's a receiver. He's a tight end. Here's the problem with Kittle. If you take Kittle out of the game, there's a very good chance you're going to win. Okay? And you saw that in the fourth quarter in the Super Bowl. They took Kittle out of the game. With the last 7 minutes of the game, when they touched the ball, Kittle did not do anything. And the reason why is the defense of Kansas City, which wasn't one of the top defenses in the league, especially in the second half, they played better, but they were far from a good defense. They were far from it.
The Vikings defense, though, tried to take out George Kittle, and they still were able to succeed.
That was different. That was different. When you have an offense versus an offensive team, and you kind of profile your team through your tight end, and that's what you do, and that's what they did in the Super Bowl, especially in the first half of the game. First half of the game, Kittle's was unbelievable. In the second half of the game, he completely fell off. When you take out your best offensive option, the structure of the game is completely different. And I'm telling you right now, if you overpay George Kittle, and you're going to pay him between $17 to $19 million a year for the next 4 to 5 years, and for the next 3 years. This is a guy that also is injury prone. He was injury prone in the beginning part of his career. You're going to pay this guy. You're going to overpay a guy because of 2 seasons. You're out of your mind. If I was John Lynch and I was Kyle Shanahan, I would not make that move. Now, if you can pay George Kittle 2 years, $30 million, I would do that. But if you're going to have to pay him a 4 or 5 year deal, and you're going to have to give him an outtake of $50 to $60 million of a signing bonus, I'm not doing that. I don't care how good he is.
So Travis Kelce right now is the highest paid 5 years, $46 million.
He wants $80 million.
Yeah, I think $80 million is a stretch, but I think being that, one, the tight end position has become more valuable, and 2, Kittle was also younger than Kelce when he took the contract.
Which is more important, a tight end or a wide receiver?
I agree it's a wide receiver, but I'm saying...
So why would you pay a tight end when you can get yourself a wide receiver for that kind of money?
But where are you going to find a wide receiver, though?
What do you mean where are you going to find? You're going to draft one. That's what you're going to do. That's something they didn't do this year when they had an opportunity where there was... They said this was the best wide receiving class in the last 15 years.
But the question is, why does that correlate, though? Because you wouldn't have to pay that rookie wide receiver, even if it was a first-round pick, for a while. So you could pay Kittle now.
Why pay Kittle now when you're gonna be in salary cap hell, and you're gonna need pieces like a corner? You're not gonna be able to get a good corner and a good wide receiver in the draft. It just doesn't happen that way. You're gonna get one or the other. So you're a championship competitive team right now, and if you want a top corner that's gonna be a free agent next year, you're gonna have to pay top dollar for that corner. So tell me, you're gonna pay a guy like George Kittle $80 million when you need a corner, a shutdown corner, which you did not have throughout the regular season last year, and it showed in the playoffs. It absolutely showed in the playoffs. And you're a team that was a running team. You were predominantly a running team, a three-headed monster. Now you're going to go into the season paying somebody of that magnitude $80 million, where I'm going to tell you right now, George Kittle gets hurt. And this is a guy that's been injury prone since he come into the league. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to overstate it. This is a guy you do not pay $80 million. If you're going to give George Kittle a 4-year, $50 million contract, all right. But if you're going to pay him $80 million, he's not worth it. I'm not paying him. And it's a complete ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I just still
I'm
think,
not paying
though,
a tight end that
with
much.
the team being that young, and again, those are being the only two needs. Yes, they should have drafted them. They drafted a receiver with their second or late first round pick, but they didn't draft one at 14 when they should have, and then a corner. If that's the only two things you need, I think you can afford to not extremely overpay. I agree with you. I would not pay him 4 years, $80 million. That's way too much. But
And Snug is saying 10 minutes of winning the Super Bowl, but they quit on their running game. Okay, they quit on their running game because their running game was their game.
and their running game was also figured out.
So here's the thing. You're going to overpay a tight end. He's a great tight end. I love George Kittle. And I think somebody will give him the money. Somebody will give him that money that he wants. But why should it be San Francisco? Even if they don't have George Kittle, let's say they get a predominantly good wide receiver like Julio Jones. Let's say Julio Jones right now he's going to be 30 years old. He's a player that wants to get paid. And he is, I don't know if they extended his contract. Did they?
Yes, they did. Last year they did.
All right. So I could see Atlanta trading him. I could see Atlanta trading him in the offseason this year. Why not wait until the offseason and see who's going to be available? What veteran wide receiver where you don't have to pay $80 million for? You can get two veteran wide receivers for the price of George Kittle. Because if Kittle's asking price is $80 million for a tight end, that's almost asking for a top pass rusher, a top offensive, not even a top offensive lineman. George Kittle be one of the highest paid players besides quarterbacks in the NFL. Is he worth that in just having two great years? In my eyes, no. Absolutely not. What did he have last year? As 70 George Kittle had 85 passes for 1,053 yards, 5 touchdowns. You're going to pay a guy $80 million?
Do you see tight ends have 1,000-yard seasons?
It doesn't matter. I'd rather pay a wide receiver. Here's the thing. Amari Cooper, who I'm not a big fan of, and he is a second-tier wide receiver, had 1,189 yards, 8 touchdowns on the Dallas Cowboys. Okay? And how much did he get paid? $100 million. So you're going to sit here and tell me that this guy, George Kittle, is going to get paid wide receiver money. Okay? Wide receiver money because he's a great tight end for 2 years? Give me a break.
But again, I think
I'm sorry.
It depends
I'm not
on the team,
that.
though, too, because you have to look at the Niners the way they are. Kittle was their receiver, essentially.
He's a tight end.
1,377 yards, 5 touchdowns in 2018, and then 1,053, 5 touchdowns like we were talking about
Teams
last
are figuring
year.
them out.
Okay, maybe to an extent, and again, that's also based on them not trying to get another receiver, but I don't think the money issue correlates.
5 touchdowns for 1,053 yards is not worth $80 million. I'm sorry, I'm not paying a guy $80 million, no matter how good he is at blocking and what he does and how he is a complete blanket for Jimmy Garoppolo. I am not making that move. And if I was John Lynch right now and knowing that my team was 10 minutes away from winning a Super Bowl and George Kittle couldn't make the play when he needed to make the plays in the open field, well, I'm not paying him that kind of money. I'm sorry. I'm just not. And I'm sorry. As much as I like Snug and his thoughts to it, I beg to differ. I'm not overpaying a tight end, and I'm not paying a tight end $40 million to a tight end that's probably just as good or even better than he is, okay? Travis Kelce. So
right.
I'm not doing it. And I think that's going to happen. I think that's what they're going to overpay George Kittle, and it's going to affect their salary cap moving forward for the very near future. It's going to have John Lynch get fired, and it's going to have Kyle Shanahan get fired in the next 2 or 3 years.
But again, I don't think it correlates with what the weaknesses of the teams are money-wise. The problem is they didn't draft those positions in certain drafts. They bolstered up.
Whose fault is that?
That's John Lynch.
Okay.
So they bolstered up the defensive line nicely, no doubt about that.
Really?
Of course.
The defensive line. So they added they got rid of an all-pro or Pro Bowl player in
I'm talking about the entire track
in
record.
Faulkner. And all of a sudden they bring in a guy from a draft that a lot of people were surprised. They thought he was a second round draft pick, and they drafted him in that pick for the Indianapolis Colts, which made absolutely no sense.
That made no sense. I'm talking about the track record as a whole. They took a lot of defensive linemen.
They lost defensive linemen in this year's offseason.
Right.
They're not going to be as dominant.
That cancels out. But
they're not going to be as dominant this year, Speedy. That's the problem.
But still, they've bolstered their line in comparison to other positions, is what I'm saying. And they didn't address corner, except for signing Richard Sherman. They didn't address corner. They didn't draft a corner, and they didn't draft a receiver, like we've been saying. That's not a money issue.